That shade of orange is simply aggressive. The words hung in the humid, pre-hurricane air, thick and unwelcome as a cloud of gnats. I blinked slowly, letting my brain process the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the statement. Standing before me, clipboard in hand, and a look of profound disappointment on her face, was Carol. Carol, president for life of the Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a woman whose hair was lacquered into a blonde helmet that could likely deflect small arms fire. Aggressive? I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. My coffee, rapidly cooling in my hand, suddenly seemed like a woefully inadequate chemical defense for the morning I was having. And loud, she added, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard of doom. Article 7, Section 4B, Subsection 3, clearly states that all commercial vehicles temporarily parked within the community for approved residential projects must maintain aesthetic harmony. This, she said, gesturing with her entire body at the offending vehicle, is visual discord. The source of her ire was a large Ram 3500 dually work truck. It belonged to Frank, my contractor, a man who looked like he'd been carved from a block of granite and seasoned with 60 years of unfiltered cynicism. The truck was, admittedly, very orange. It was the kind of unapologetic, high-visibility safety orange that screamed, "I am here. Please do not back your Prius into my 1,000-pound trailer hitch." To Carol, it was basically a declaration of war on her carefully curated world of beige, taupe, and greige. Frank, who was leaning against the truck's tailgate, took a long, slow sip from his own thermos. He looked from his truck to Carol, then back to his truck, as if trying to see the violent outburst of color theory she was describing. "It's a work truck, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's company policy, safety color." "Safety?" Carol sniffed, as if the concept were a vulgarity. "Is it's AIF for our property values when prospective buyers drive through and see this construction site chic monstrosity? We have a palette. It was approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Sunset Peach is on there. Gentle Fawn. Even Whispering Sage. There is no Screaming Tangerine Nightmare." I took a deep breath, marshalling my strength. "Carol, it's a truck. It'll be here while they work on my patio, and then it will be gone." "Also," I said, pointing a thumb towards the sky, which was turning a bruised, ominous shade of purple-gray, "we're about to be hit by Hurricane Bartholomew, a Category 2 storm. I feel like the chromatic purity of Frank's truck is maybe not our most pressing concern. This was, I've learned, a tactical error. Introducing real-world problems into Carol's HOA-centric worldview is like trying to explain quantum physics to a house cat." She gave me a withering look. "A storm is temporary, Leo. A precedent is forever. If I allow this, what's next? Unpermitted gazebos? Garish lawn flamingos?" I thought about the plastic flamingo I had secretly ordered online, just to spite her. It was currently hidden in my garage, awaiting the perfect moment to make its debut. Standing next to Frank was his apprentice, Kevin, a lanky kid in his early 20s who seemed to be powered entirely by energy drinks and a fundamental misunderstanding of his surroundings. "My cousin has a truck that color," Kevin offered helpfully. "He does repo work. It's so people see him coming, you know? It's like a warning." Frank shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Kevin, go count the pavers. Again." Kevin shrugged and shuffled off toward the backyard. "See?" Carol said, vindicated. "A warning. It's threatening." I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache begin its own percussive assault behind my eyes. 6 months. 6 months ago, my wife, Sarah, and I had sunk every penny we had into this house in Harmony Creek Estates. The brochure had promised a serene, master-planned community with unparalleled peace and tranquility. They'd failed to mention that the peace was policed by a homeowners association with more rules and regulations than the federal tax code, and that all of it was enforced by one woman's iron will and her sacred binder. In the past 6 months, I'd received written warnings for my grass being a 1/4 inch above the approved seasonal height, my welcome mat having an unapproved level of whimsy, and for leaving my garage door open for, and I am not exaggerating, 11 minutes while I unloaded groceries. Carol had it on camera. She was the Eye of Sauron, if Sauron was a retired dental hygienist with a passion for suburban oppression. "Look, Carol," I tried, aiming for a tone of placating reasonableness that I absolutely did not feel. "It's a temporary vehicle for an approved project. Hurricane's coming. Can we please just put a pin in the great color war of 2025 and deal with it next week?" "Fines are assessed daily," she said, already scribbling on her citation form with a gold-plated pen. "And I'll have you know I've already put in a call to the board to discuss a provisional lien for non-compliance." She tore the sheet off the clipboard with a flourish and handed it to me. It felt as though she'd just served me with divorce papers. Frank watched her march back toward her identical beige house, her brisk, self-important walk a testament to her victory. He shook his head slowly. "You know," he said to me, his voice low, "for $100, I could accidentally back into her mailbox, make it look like the wind. Tempting, Frank, deeply tempting. But I'm pretty sure she has military-grade surveillance cameras disguised as garden gnomes." "Probably," he conceded. He walked over to his truck, grabbed a 50-pound bag of concrete mix, and hoisted it onto his shoulder. As he walked past the spot where Carol had been standing, he made a great show of stumbling, losing his grip on the bag. It hit the pristine asphalt with a dull thump, and a corner ripped open. A cloud of fine gray dust erupted from the bag, settling in a perfect, ghostly film all over Carol's reserved for HOA president parking spot, and the toes of her bone-white New Balance sneakers she'd left on her porch. Frank looked down at the mess, then back at me. He gave a slow, deliberate wink. I grinned. It was a small victory in a long and pointless war. But as the first fat drops of rain began to fall from the bruised sky, I had a feeling the day's battles were just getting started. By mid-afternoon, Hurricane Bartholomew had decided to stop flirting with the coast and make a full-throated commitment. The world outside our windows dissolved into a churning, roaring mess of gray and green. The wind, no longer just a breeze, had escalated into a full-on tantrum. It sounded like a giant was outside, trying to return a defective mattress to God and getting increasingly angry about the customer service. Inside, our house had become a cozy little bunker against the apocalypse. I was sprawled on the couch, my golden retriever, Boba, using my legs as a pillow. His strategy for dealing with existential weather threats was to sleep through them, a philosophy I deeply admired. Sarah, my wife, was a whirlwind of calm competence. Having an ER nurse for a partner during a crisis is like having a cheat code for life. While I was stress-eating Funyuns and making sure my iPad was fully charged, she was checking the batteries and the flashlights, organizing the first aid kit, and filling the bathtub with water. "You know," I said, crunching loudly on a fried onion ring of questionable nutritional value, "my disaster prep was also very thorough." Sarah paused, raising an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What did it involve?" "I bought 3 family-sized bags of these, a case of beer that's now getting warm in the powerless fridge, and I downloaded the entire run of a Danish crime drama called The Bridge of Sorrow. I figure if the power's out for a week, I might as well get bleak and learn some conversational Danish." She smiled, shaking her head. You're an idiot. But I'm your idiot, I said, waggling my eyebrows. And I have Funyuns. Huddled in the armchair, looking pale, was Kevin, Frank's apprentice. Frank had sent him home when the storm picked up, but Kevin's apartment was in one of those new-build complexes that local legend claimed was constructed entirely of balsa wood and wishful thinking, right in the middle of a floodplain. He'd called me in a panic, and I couldn't just leave the kid to be swept away. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died with a soft, final sigh. The hum of the refrigerator, the air conditioner, the very pulse of the house vanished. We were plunged into the dim, gray light of the storm. "Okay," Kevin said, his voice tight. "Power's out." He held up his phone. "Is your Wi-Fi down too?" Sarah and I exchanged a look. "Yeah, Kevin," she said gently. "The Wi-Fi router, she needs the electricity." "Oh, right." He looked crestfallen. The next few hours were a symphony of weather-related chaos. A series of loud thwumps on the roof announced the departure of several shingles. A particularly violent gust of wind was followed by a sickening crack-crunch from the front yard. I peered through the blinds to see our majestic HOA-approved oak tree had decided to divorce itself of a limb the size of a small car, which was now intimately acquainted with our front lawn. "Well," I announced to the room, "the good news is we have firewood for the next decade. The bad news is Carol's going to have an aneurysm about unapproved lawn debris." Sarah came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Leo, promise me you won't get into it with her tomorrow. It's not worth it. We have insurance, the tree guys will come, it'll be fine." I know, I'll be good," I lied. It was an easy lie to tell when the world was ending, but I knew that as soon as the sun came out, Carol's particular brand of tyranny would feel 10 times more irritating. As evening fell, the storm's fury began to wane. The deafening roar subsided into a steady, percussive drumming of rain, and the wind's shrieks became mournful howls. We ate lukewarm canned chili by candlelight, the conversation stilted and punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of a new leak in the kitchen ceiling. Boba, sensing the shift, finally woke up and began nudging my hand, demanding his share of the emergency rations. Kevin, who had been morosely scrolling through his phone's saved TikToks, suddenly looked up. "Hey, my buddy who's a volunteer firefighter just posted. Said the bridge on Route 5 is washed out, and the underpass on the main highway is totally flooded." Sarah's face grew serious. "That cuts off the whole north side of town." "Yeah," Kevin said, oblivious to the implications. "Sucks. That's where the good Taco Bell is." But I knew what Sarah was thinking. The Northwood Community Center, the designated emergency shelter for our entire area, was on the north side of town. The hospital was there. The main fire station. The storm might be passing, but the real problems were just beginning. Later that night, with the rain finally reduced to a gentle patter, I stood on the covered back porch, looking out into the pitch-black, silent neighborhood. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, wet earth, and shredded leaves. The oppressive, unnatural silence of a modern suburb without its electrical hum was unnerving. There were no streetlights, no porch lights, no gentle glow from 100 living room windows. There was just darkness. It was a blank slate, a fresh start. For a brief, blissful moment, I allowed myself to imagine a world where the hurricane had washed away not just tree limbs and power lines, but also the petty tyrannies of bylaws and the aggressive beigeness of it all. A world where neighbors helped neighbors not because a rule book told them to, but because it was the right thing to do. It was a nice thought. It lasted about 5 seconds. Then I remembered Carol lived 3 doors down, and I was pretty sure her binder was waterproof. The real storm wasn't the hurricane. The real storm was coming tomorrow. The next morning, the world was painfully bright. The sun shone with the kind of cheerful indifference only an inanimate celestial body can muster, glinting off a million broken branches and puddles of standing water. The neighborhood looked like a giant had thrown a party, gotten blackout drunk, and passed out in the middle of it. Our lawn was a Jackson Pollock of leaves, twigs, and a stray garden gnome that I was pretty sure belonged to the Hendersons 2 streets over. Frank arrived around 9, his orange truck navigating the debris-strewn road like a salmon swimming upstream. Kevin, who had slept on our couch, looked relieved to see him. "Morning," Frank grunted, surveying the massive oak limb on my lawn. "Looks like Bartholomew did a little amateur pruning for you." "Yeah," I said, sipping coffee that I'd made on our camp stove. It tasted faintly of propane and desperation. "I'm just waiting for the citation from Carol. Unscheduled arboreal alteration. Probably a $200 fine." Frank chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling in a dryer. "Give her time. She's probably laminating a new rule about it as we speak." We spent a few minutes assessing the damage to the patio project. Miraculously, the half-finished foundation was fine, though the entire area was covered in a thick layer of mud. As Frank and Kevin started clearing the muck, I heard it. It started as a low, distant rumble, a sound that was distinctly not part of the post-hurricane soundscape of birds chirping and the occasional chainsaw. It grew steadily louder, a deep guttural thrum of powerful diesel engines. "What's that?" Kevin asked, pausing with a shovel full of mud. We all looked toward the entrance of the neighborhood. A minute later, they came into view. 3 of them. The first was a big white box truck with the bold blue FEMA logo on the side. The second was a similar truck, this one emblazoned with the iconic Red Cross. The third was an unmarked utility truck, its bed loaded with what looked like portable generators, massive spools of cable, and pallets of bottled water. They were a convoy of hope, salvation on wheels. They were moving slowly, clearly trying to use the main road through Harmony Creek Estates as a shortcut. Given what Kevin had said about the bridge and the underpass being out, our pristine, tree-lined street was likely the only passable route to the hard-hit neighborhoods and the emergency shelter on the north side of town. "Huh," Frank said, a rare note of approval in his voice. "Good on them, taking the smart route." The convoy reached the decorative brick entrance of our community and slowed to a stop. And then, it happened. From 3 houses down, a garage door slid open. Emerging from the darkness like a bat out of a suburban hell was Carol's golf cart. It was a beige custom job with leather seats and her initials, CM, monogrammed on the side in tasteful gold thread. She drove it with a grim sense of purpose, not onto the street, but directly into the middle of the entrance, turning it perfectly perpendicular to the road. She parked it, engaged the brake with a decisive click, and switched it off. She got out, smoothed her wrinkle-free linen pants, and retrieved her sacred binder from the passenger seat. Planting her feet firmly on the asphalt, she stood there, arms crossed, a 5'4" blockade of pure, unadulterated entitlement. The 3 of us, me, Frank, and Kevin, stood in my driveway, utterly frozen. We were a tableau of disbelief. "No," I whispered. The word came out involuntarily. It was a plea to the universe. "No, she is not doing this." Kevin's jaw was slack. "Whoa, is she gonna fight that truck?" Frank squinted, stroking his chin. "My money's on the truck, but it's closer than you'd think." The driver of the lead FEMA truck, a man in a high-vis vest with a weary face you could read like a map of bad days, leaned out his window. We were too far away to hear the words, but we could see the universal language of his gestures. A shrug. An open-palmed what gives? Gesture. A point down the road, indicating his intention to pass. Carol did not move. She simply held up her binder, tapping a page with her finger. She was citing bylaws. She was citing bylaws to a federal disaster relief agency. My coffee went cold in my stomach. The humor of the situation evaporated, replaced by a hot, sick feeling of rage. This wasn't about the color of a work truck or the height of my grass anymore. This wasn't petty neighborhood squabbling. This was something else. This was a level of self-important, delusional insanity I had not thought possible, even from her. I could see the FEMA driver leaning back into his cab, probably talking on a radio. He looked frustrated. The drivers of the other two trucks just looked on, baffled. And Carol stood her ground, a lone sentinel guarding the sanctity of her precious asphalt against the impending invasion of help and decency. "I have to go down there," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Frank put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice serious, "let me give you some advice. Sometimes the best thing to do is turn around, go inside, and pretend you ain't seen nothing." "I can't," I said, shaking my head. I started walking, my feet carrying me toward the slow-motion train wreck at the end of the street. "I just can't." Behind me, I heard Frank sigh. "Kid's gonna get himself put on a permanent mulch monitoring committee." My footsteps on the debris-littered asphalt sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet morning air. Every house I passed was a silent observer, blinds twitching, curtains rustling. The entire neighborhood was holding its breath, watching the drama unfold. As I got closer, the conversation, previously just a pantomime, sharpened into focus. "Oh, and I'm telling you, ma'am, we have authorization from the state," the FEMA driver was saying, his voice strained with a heroic level of patience. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days and was now facing his own personal final boss. "Authorization from the state does not supersede a legally binding covenant recorded with the county clerk's office," Carol retorted, her voice sharp and clear. She sounded like a lawyer in a bad TV movie. "This is private property." I stepped up next to the FEMA driver, who gave me a wary glance. "Carol," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What, in the name of all that is holy, is going on?" She turned to me, and a flicker of a smile crossed her face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who thinks you've just wandered into her trap. "Leo, perfect. As a member of this community and a signatory to its covenants, you'll understand. I was just explaining to this gentleman that Harmony Creek's roads are privately owned and maintained by the HOA. She patted the hood of the FEMA truck as if it were a disobedient dog. These heavy-class vehicles far exceed the maximum gross vehicle weight outlined in our road maintenance and preservation agreement. We just had the asphalt resealed last spring. The cost was astronomical. This kind of traffic will cause cracks, fissures, and undue stress on the subsurface. I stared at her, my mouth hanging slightly open. "Carol, it's a convoy, a relief convoy. They're trying to get supplies to people who probably don't have homes right now, let alone pristine asphalt." The FEMA driver, whose name tag read Mike, chimed in. "Ma'am, with all due respect, people need water. They need generators. The shelter over on Oak Street is running on fumes. We need to get through." Carol actually tilted her head, as if considering this. "And I'm sure they do. I sympathize, I truly do. But the bylaws are the bedrock of this community. They protect our investments. Article 12, Section 2A is very clear. Any damage to common infrastructure resulting from non-approved vehicular access will be billed directly to the responsible party. Do you have proof of insurance? A copy of your corporate liability policy? And more importantly, have you filled out Form 11B, the request for temporary access for oversized vehicles, and submitted it to the Architectural Review Committee for approval? There's a minimum 72-hour review period for that, you know." Mike, the FEMA driver, looked like his soul was trying to leave his body. "Ma'am, there was a hurricane. 72 hours ago, I was in a different state. There is no Form 11B that's going to help anyone right now." "Then my hands are tied," Carol said with an air of tragic finality. "I suggest you find an alternate route." "There are no alternate routes," I burst out, my voice louder than I intended. "The bridge is out. The underpass is flooded. This is it. You know that." Carol turned her icy gaze on me. "And whose fault is that, Leo? Perhaps if the county had listened to my letters about reinforcing the bridge abutments instead of wasting money on frivolous public art projects, we wouldn't be in this situation. This is a failure of public infrastructure, and I will not allow it to become a burden on the private infrastructure of Harmony Creek." It was like arguing with a brick wall if the brick wall had memorized Robert's Rules of Order and was convinced of its own moral superiority. She was operating in a completely different reality, a bubble of bureaucratic nonsense that no amount of logic or reason could penetrate. Every point we made was deflected by a counterpoint from her binder. "It's a state of emergency. The state of our asphalt is also an emergency. People could be hurt. And my property values could be hurt. This is absurd. What's absurd is a lack of respect for established rules and procedures." She was an impenetrable fortress of pettiness. Mike looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. He was a professional, trained to handle disaster zones, not this specific boutique brand of suburban insanity. He was losing, we were losing, to a woman with a golf cart and a binder. I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Carol, just move the cart. Let them pass. We can argue about the theoretical fissures in the asphalt later." "Absolutely not," she said, clutching her binder to her chest like a shield. "Not without the proper paperwork." She then did something that nearly sent me over the edge. She smiled sweetly at Mike. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Perhaps you can call your supervisor and see if they can't airdrop the supplies. That would avoid the roads entirely." With that, she turned her back on us, resuming her guard post position in front of her golf cart. A smug, self-satisfied queen reigning over her kingdom of one blocked road. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had called the cops. About 10 minutes into the standoff, a local police cruiser, a single, solitary beacon of what I hoped was authority, rolled up to the scene. It parked behind the last truck in the convoy, and out stepped a police officer. He looked young, impossibly young. His uniform was so crisp it looked like he'd just taken it out of the plastic. He had a fresh, eager-to-help face, and the general demeanor of a kid who had aced all his tests at the academy but had never actually had to deal with a human being having a complete and total logic failure in the wild. Let's call him Officer Miller. Officer Miller surveyed the scene. 3 massive relief trucks, 1 strategically parked golf cart, 1 fuming homeowner, me, 1 exasperated-looking FEMA driver, and 1 small, immaculately dressed woman armed with a 3-ring binder. You could see the flowchart in his head trying to process the situation. "All right, folks, what seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice full of official calm. Before Mike or I could even speak, Carol was on him like a hawk on a field mouse. "Officer, thank goodness you're here!" she exclaimed, her voice dripping with the syrupy sweetness of a victimized citizen. "This man," she said, pointing at Mike, "is trying to bring these unauthorized, overweight commercial vehicles onto our private roads without a permit and is refusing to leave." She shoved the binder into Officer Miller's hands. He took it, looking slightly bewildered. "See," she said, pointing. "Article 12. It's a legally recorded covenant. He's trespassing." Officer Miller looked from the binder to the giant FEMA logo on the truck. The cogs in his brain were grinding audibly. "Sir," he said, turning to Mike. Mike, bless his heart, tried again. He explained the situation calmly and concisely. State of emergency, critical supplies, no alternate routes, life-saving mission. He hit all the keywords. I chimed in. Officer, she's holding up disaster relief. This has to be illegal, right? Obstruction or something? Miller looked torn. He was a man caught between two immovable forces, the obvious moral right thing to do, and a screaming woman waving a laminated, legally-ish sounding document in his face. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose the path of de-escalation, which, in this case, was the path of utter uselessness. Ma'am, he said to Carol, handing the binder back as if it were radioactive. I understand your position. Then he turned to Mike. And I understand yours, sir. But this is technically a private road. It's a civil matter. A civil matter. The two most infuriating words in the English language when you're facing a crisis. A civil matter? Mike repeated, his voice cracking. I'm trying to deliver aid during a federally declared disaster. And I can't force her to move her vehicle from her own private property without a court order or direct command from my sergeant, Miller explained, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. I'm the only unit in this sector right now. Everyone else is on emergency calls. My hands are tied. Carol beamed. She had the law on her side, or at least a version of the law that was too scared to argue with her. So what are you going to do? I asked Miller, my voice tight with fury. Well, he said, puffing out his chest slightly, trying to regain some semblance of authority, I can ask the driver to find another route. There is no other route, Mike and I yelled in unison. Miller flinched. Okay, well, I can write her a citation for obstruction. That's about it. It's just a ticket. It won't physically move the golf cart. I felt a wave of profound hopelessness wash over me. The system wasn't just failing. It was actively siding with the forces of absurdity. Officer Miller, a representative of law and order, was being defeated by paperwork and a belligerent homeowner. He was treating a life-or-death situation like a dispute over a parking space. I turned and walked away. I couldn't even look at them anymore. I stalked back toward my house, my fists clenched, a string of curses echoing in my head. Frank was right. I should have stayed inside, but now I was in it, and we were losing. The bad guys, or in this case, the ridiculously misguided lady, were winning, and I had absolutely no idea what to do next. I stomped back into my own driveway, feeling like I'd just lost a debate with a pigeon. Frank was leaning against his truck, arms crossed, with a look on his face that said, I told you so. Let me guess, he said dryly. She quoted the Magna Carta, and he wrote the truck a parking ticket. Worse, I seethed. He called it a civil matter, and basically told the FEMA guys to kick rocks. Sarah came out the front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She'd clearly been watching from the window. Leo, what happened? I saw the police car. I recounted the entire infuriating exchange, the binder, the private road defense, the utter uselessness of Officer Miller. When I was done, I was pacing back and forth on the driveway, a caged animal of suburban rage. This is insane, I finished, gesturing wildly toward the scene of the crime. A woman has brought the entire disaster relief effort for this half of the county to a grinding halt because she's worried about microscopic cracks in the pavement, and the law is just shrugging. Sarah put a hand on my arm. Leo, honey, I told you, just leave it. You'll only make yourself crazy. She's impossible. But it's not just about her being impossible anymore, Sarah, I said, my voice rising. It's not about us. It's about them. I pointed to the trucks. They have medical supplies. You, of all people, know what that means. What if the shelter is running low on insulin? What if someone's on an oxygen concentrator and their power is out? What if some kid needs an EpiPen? That's not a civil matter. That's life and death. I saw a change in her eyes. The practical, stay out of it wife vanished, and the ER nurse took her place. Her expression hardened. The abstract problem had just become a series of tangible, terrifying medical scenarios. She knew exactly what a 3-hour delay could mean for someone in fragile health. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What can we do?" This was the moment the Leo versus Carol task force officially convened in my driveway. It was a motley crew. Me, a perpetually annoyed graphic designer. Sarah, a newly radicalized medical professional. Frank, a cynical contractor with a surprising rebellious streak. And Kevin, who was currently trying to use my car's USB port to charge his phone. "I got a skid steer in the back," Frank offered, his eyes glinting. "We could just relocate her little golf cart. Lift it up, put it on the grass. Plausible deniability. Say the ground was soft from the rain and it just sank a little." "That's destruction of property, Frank," Sarah countered, though she looked tempted. "She'd have us in court for years." Kevin looked up from his phone. "We could start a hashtag," he suggested earnestly, like #LetTheTrucksGo or #Harmony Creek Hostage Crisis. If it goes viral, maybe the news will show up. I appreciated the Gen Z spirit, but I didn't think we had time to wait for a story to trend on Twitter. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a neighbor, Bob, from down the street on the secret neighborhood group chat. The one we'd created the day Carol tried to ban outdoor grilling on Wednesdays. The text read, "Hey guys, I'm near the entrance. I can hear the FEMA driver on his radio. He just told his dispatcher they're blocked. He said, if we can't get access in the next 5 minutes, they're going to redirect us to the old logging road. That's a 3-hour detour minimum. The shelter will have to wait." 5 minutes. A cold dread washed over me. The theoretical problem suddenly had a very real, very sharp deadline. 5 minutes until the convoy gave up and left. 5 minutes until Carol's absurd, petty tyranny scored a definitive victory over common sense and human decency. My mind raced, frantically sifting through the options. Logic had failed. The police had failed. Frank's plan was tempting but would land us in jail. Kevin's plan would, at best, get us a few angry emojis. We were out of moves. Or were we? An idea began to form in my mind. It was a long shot. It was audacious. It was borderline insane. It involved breaking the chain of command and escalating this whole situation to a level that Carol, in her wildest, binder-fueled fantasies, could never have anticipated. It was, for lack of a better term, the nuclear option. I looked at Sarah, my eyes wide. The gears were turning, clicking into place. The hurricane, the blocked road, Sarah's job, her family. It was all connected. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "New plan. Forget the skid steer, forget the hashtags." I turned to my wife. "Sarah, I need your phone. What's Dave's direct number?" "Not his cell, his station number." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood immediately who I was talking about. Dave. Her brother. Fire Captain Dave. "Leo, you can't," she breathed, a hint of awe in her voice. 5 minutes, Sarah," I said, holding out my hand. "They have 5 minutes." Without another word, she pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and handed it to me. On the screen was the contact I needed. I took a deep breath. It was time to call in the cavalry. My thumb hovered over the call button. This was a line you don't uncross. You don't call a fire captain on his duty line in the middle of a regional crisis unless something is genuinely, monumentally screwed up. For the first time all day, I felt a tremor of doubt. Was a dispute with an HOA president, however deranged, truly worthy of this? Then I looked down the street. I saw Carol, standing smugly by her golf cart. I saw Officer Miller, helplessly shrugging at the FEMA driver. And I saw the convoy, 3 trucks full of life-saving supplies, their engines idling, ready to give up and leave people to suffer because of one woman's obsession with pavement. Yeah, it was worthy. I pressed the button. The phone rang twice, a sharp, official-sounding brrr-pee before it was picked up. "Fire Station 3, Captain Miller speaking," a brisk voice said. Not Dave. My heart sank. Yes, I need to speak with Fire Captain Dave Jensen," I said, trying to sound as official as possible. "It's an emergency situation regarding a blocked disaster relief route." There was a muffled sound, and then a new voice came on the line. A voice I knew from a dozen family barbecues and holiday dinners. But this wasn't the voice that told bad jokes over burnt hot dogs. This was a different version of Dave. "This is Captain Jensen." His voice was clipped, all business. "Dave, it's Leo," I said, speaking quickly, the words tumbling out. "Sarah's husband. I have 60 seconds to explain. Listen." I didn't wait for a response. "There is a FEMA and Red Cross disaster relief convoy at the entrance to my neighborhood, Harmony Creek Estates. They have critical supplies, water, generators, medical equipment, for the Northwood shelter. The only accessible road is through our subdivision. My HOA president is physically blocking them with her golf cart. She's claiming they'll damage the asphalt." "You're kidding me," Dave said, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "I am not," I said, my own voice tight with urgency. "Local PD is on scene but says his hands are tied because it's a private road. He's calling it a civil matter. Dave, the convoy leader, just told his dispatcher they have 3 minutes before they are officially rerouted. The detour will take over 3 hours. They are at the main entrance intersection of Harmony Lane and Cypress Road. You know the one." There was a brief, crackling silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears shifting in his head, processing the tactical absurdity of the situation. He wasn't just hearing about a squabble anymore. He was visualizing a critical break in the entire emergency response logistics chain for his district. When he spoke again, all traces of the casual brother-in-law were gone. His voice was pure, unadulterated command authority. "Leo, stay where you are. Do not engage with the HOA president or the police officer any further. I am handling it." Click. He hung up. I stood there in my driveway, phone in hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. Frank, Sarah, and Kevin were staring at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. "What did he say?" Sarah whispered. I lowered the phone, a slow, slightly manic grin spreading across my face. "He said he's handling it." The next 2 minutes were the longest of my life. Down the street, the tableau was unchanged. Carol stood triumphant. Officer Miller was now trying to take notes on a small pad, looking for all the world like a hall monitor dealing with a playground dispute. Mike, the FEMA driver, had his head in his hands, the very picture of defeat. He was probably seconds away from giving the order to turn around. "It's not going to work," Frank muttered, shaking his head. "Fire department's not going to get involved in an HOA tiff." "It's not an HOA tiff anymore," I said, though a seed of doubt was sprouting in my own mind. "It's obstruction of an emergency route." And then we heard it. It wasn't the familiar, singular siren of a police car. This was something different. It started as a faint, low-frequency groan in the distance, a sound you felt in your chest more than you heard with your ears. Then it grew, layering into a deep, guttural roar, punctuated by the sharp, piercing shriek of an air horn. It was the sound of something very large, very heavy, and very important coming our way. Fast. Every head at the entrance snapped toward the main road. Carol's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion. Officer Miller stopped writing. A moment later, it came into view. It was a ladder truck. A full-sized, gleaming, red, monumentally huge fire engine from Station 3. It wasn't coming to negotiate. It was coming in hot, lights blazing, its sheer size making the FEMA trucks look like Tonka toys. It didn't even attempt to turn into our subdivision. It roared right up to the entrance on the public road and stopped, its massive grille filling Carol's entire field of vision. And tucked in right behind it, like a shark escorting a whale, was a dark blue state trooper SUV. The ladder truck's air brake hissed, a sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the neighborhood. The doors opened. A fire captain, not Dave, but one of his colleagues, stepped out on one side. On the other, the driver's door of the SUV opened, and out stepped a man who was the physical embodiment of no nonsense. He was tall, ramrod straight, with a graying, flat-top haircut and a gaze that could peel paint. His uniform was crisp, his boots were shined, and he radiated an aura of absolute, unassailable authority. This was Sergeant Davis. The power dynamic on the street didn't just shift, it shattered into a million pieces. Sergeant Davis strode past the FEMA trucks, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. He didn't look at Mike. He didn't look at me. He walked directly to Carol, who looked like a startled flamingo. Officer Miller, bless his heart, took a step forward. "Sergeant, I've got this under control." Davis didn't even break stride. He held up a hand, a simple gesture that stopped Miller cold. "Stand down, officer. This is a state-level command now." He stopped about 3 feet from Carol. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air around him crackled with authority. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a calm, chilling baritone. "I am Sergeant Davis of the State Police, under the authority of the Governor's declared state of emergency and State Statute 34B. All private and public roadways are hereby designated as emergency access routes. You are currently in violation of state law by obstructing the movement of emergency personnel and federal relief services." Carol sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. She held up her binder, the source of all her power, now rendered utterly impotent. But the HOA, the covenants, the asphalt." Sergeant Davis didn't even glance at the binder. He looked her dead in the eye. "You have 2 choices," he said, his voice dropping another octave. "You can move your vehicle immediately, or—" He paused, gesturing with his thumb back toward the colossal fire engine. "My associate from the fire department, who is trained in vehicle extraction, will move it for you. And while he's doing that, you will be placed in the back of my car and charged with a Class E felony for obstruction of governmental administration. The choice is entirely yours. You have 10 seconds." From beside the ladder truck, the fire captain gave a cheerful little wave toward the golf cart, then patted the engine's massive steel bumper. The message couldn't have been clearer. Checkmate? For a moment that stretched into eternity, Carol just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The binder slipped from her fingers and fell to the asphalt with a pathetic slap. All the fight, all the smug certainty drained out of her. She was no longer the queen of Harmony Creek. She was just a small, foolish woman who had picked a fight with a fire engine and the full weight of the state government. Wordlessly, she turned, shuffled to her golf cart with the posture of a condemned prisoner, and got in. With trembling hands, she turned the key. The little electric motor whirred to life, and she drove it onto the grass of the median out of the way. She didn't look at anyone. Sergeant Davis watched her, then turned to Mike, the FEMA driver, who was now standing by his truck, looking on in stunned amazement. Davis gave him a short, sharp nod. "You're clear to proceed." Mike scrambled back into his cab. The diesel engines of the 3 trucks roared to life. As the convoy began to roll forward, the fire captain gave 2 sharp blasts from the engine's air horn, a deafening, triumphant sound that echoed through the entire neighborhood. The fire engine's lights continued to flash, officially escorting the convoy into Harmony Creek Estates. As the lead truck passed my driveway, Mike leaned out the window. He didn't smile or wave. He just looked at me and gave a slow, solemn nod. It was a nod that said, "Thank you." It was the best I'd felt all year. The entire event, from the moment I hung up with Dave to the moment the last truck cleared the entrance, had taken less than 5 minutes. The title of my future memoir was writing itself. Sergeant Davis wasn't done. He had a quiet, firm word with Carol, handing her a ticket that I'm sure was for more than just a busted tail light. Then he walked over to Officer Miller and spoke to him in a low voice, one hand on his shoulder. It looked less like a reprimand and more like a weary, teachable moment. Finally, as he walked back to his SUV, he caught my eye. He gave me a subtle tip of his hat, a silent acknowledgement from one person who gets things done to another. Then he was gone. The fire engine followed, and a surreal silence descended once more. The spell was broken by a loud, barking laugh. It was Frank. He was bent over, slapping his knee, tears of mirth streaming down his weathered face. "Oh, that's the best thing I've ever seen," he howled. "The look on her face, priceless." Kevin was staring at his phone, his thumbs a blur. "It's all on video. 200,000 views already. #KarmaBeTheTon is trending. This is epic." Sarah came and stood beside me, slipping her arm around my waist. "My hero," she said, planting a kiss on my cheek. "Remind me to never get on your bad side." "Or Dave's," I said, still buzzing with adrenaline. A week later, the world had started to feel normal again, or at least a new version of it. The power was back on. Most of the debris was cleared, and my patio was finished. I was sitting on one of the new chairs, a cold beer in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange that even Carol couldn't call aggressive. An emergency HOA meeting had been convened via Zoom 2 days after the incident, which I attended with a giant bowl of popcorn. The video Kevin had taken had, in fact, gone viral in our local area. Faced with undeniable video evidence of her lunacy and a petition for her removal signed by 90% of the neighborhood, Carol didn't even put up a fight. She resigned in a 2-sentence email. They'd tried to nominate me for president. I'd managed to dodge that bullet by faking a truly spectacular coughing fit and claiming I had a rare, non-contagious allergy to procedural documents. They elected Bob from down the street instead, a mild-mannered accountant whose first proposed bylaw change was to reduce the entire 200-page binder down to a single sentence. Try not to be a jerk. It passed unanimously. Frank walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. He handed me the final invoice. I braced myself. "Don't worry," he said, seeing my expression. "I took a little something off the top." I looked at the bill. At the bottom, under the final tally, he'd scrawled in thick black marker, 10% local hero discount. I laughed, shaking my head. I looked out over the quiet street, where kids were riding bikes, some of them garishly colored, on the supposedly sacred asphalt. The air was peaceful. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer. The tyranny of taupe was over. I took a long swallow of my beer, the cold liquid a perfect punctuation mark to the most stressful and unexpectedly satisfying week of my life. Harmony Creek Estates. Huh. You know, for the first time since we moved in, it almost felt like it.